Hello, learners. Mr. Mon back again talking about the Industrial Revolution. We're going to be extending our unit this week, talking about a few things, specifically King Cotton, slavery in the South, and some of the sectionalism ideas leading up to the Civil War. So, before we begin, I just want to touch base on what we've talked about in the previous lesson, specifically the Industrial Revolution and how production was increased by the use of machinery and new energy sources. And we're going to be talking about specifically cotton. That's a raw material, that's actually a plant, and the machine, specifically the cotton gin. And then we're going to be talking about that effect on many cultures and people where they live, freedom, slavery, and all of that stuff as we move ahead. Looking back at a couple of different lessons we did talk about a number of inventions during the Industrial Revolution. And specifically during these lessons, we're going to be talking about the cotton gin, which is one of the most influential inventions in American history. We're also going to be touching again on immigration. Immigration is the story of the United States, and specifically with African American immigration. We're going to be touching on that a lot this week. So we looked at this video in the last couple lessons and talking about the population movement. And now we're going to be specifically talking about the African American population and their immigration to the United States. So, history of American immigration, okay? It goes back a long time. In fact, if you look to the slave trade started in the 1500s with slaves coming from Africa to the New World. Specifically in America, the first African slaves showed up in Jamestown around 1619. Okay, that was the first part of the forced immigration to America. This is called the Middle Passage. So if you think way back at the start of the year when we talked about slave trade, we talked about goods and services being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean, and Africans being taken from their homeland, not only to the United States, but also to Central, South America, and also the Caribbean. So thinking back, just want to remind us about forced immigration called the slave trade, the Middle Passage. In 1808, the United States abolishes the slave trade from Africa. So this creates a problem for slave owners and people looking for their free labor. So they decided they get around this by what's called the second Middle Passage, and that's domestic. Domestic means like homeland, your own area. Domestic slave trade is the selling of slaves within America. Okay, so you have slave owners buying and selling human beings for labor. This we're going to touch on this a little bit more in the next few slides, but it's going to impact America for forever. Okay, we're going to get eventually to the Civil War, and as we're looking at the holistic view of African American immigration and migration, then you have what's called the Great Migration, and that's post-Civil War. So after the Civil War, many African American families decide they're going to leave the South and they're going to move north. Okay, after 1863, that's the Emancipation Proclamation, when slaves were they were made free by the U.S. government, and that allowed people to move. Okay, after the Civil War, a lot of families give it a go in the South. They try to stay close to what they know. They try to stay close to their families, but after a while, a lot of families start to move north. Okay, so important to understand the holistic view of African American immigration and migration. Okay, to understand what we're going to talk about specifically, which is the second Middle Passage in relationship with the cotton gin and cotton and making money in America. So King Cotton is a term you're going to hear. It's a term basically saying how cotton is basically the king of all products in America. It's the number one export forever. Okay, for a long time, cotton is the number one thing. It replaces tobacco. Tobacco crops are dying. The soil isn't fertile anymore. And so in the South, they decide to grow cotton. And through the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, that allows slaves to clean cotton faster. They can go, like, let's say 10 times faster clean. So if they could do 1 pound of cotton an hour without the cotton gin, they can now do 10 pounds of cotton. You're like, well, cotton, you think of a cotton ball. Cotton in the raw form doesn't work like that. It's got sticky seeds in it. It's got twigs. It's got dirt. So the cotton gin allows people to clean cotton rather fast. And this causes an explosion to the cotton industry. You can produce more cotton. Now, a lot of students would think, well, if there's a cotton gin and they can clean cotton faster, we're not going to need as many slaves. This is a good thing. Nope. Sorry. What happens is slave owners, plantation owners need more slaves because now they're going to produce more cotton. So the cotton gin, you would think maybe would be the end of slavery, but actually it isn't. It actually promotes slavery and causes it to stick around a lot longer. And then, of course, as we look to cotton production, we have slaves in the field, slaves working the cotton gin, but also we have to keep in the back of our mind that the North is also benefiting from cotton also. Their factories are making money. They're selling stuff across seas to Europe. There's a huge explosion in Victorian Europe for new cotton, new clothing. And then we have to keep in the back of our mind also the child labor, which we've talked about. So all of these ideas are intertwined, okay? It's tough to teach it like that. It's a big web, but all of these different ideas do weave within each other throughout the entire unit. We're going to talk about specifically slavery during the Industrial Revolution. So like I said, the cotton gin was created around 1793, and that creates a problem for slave owners, okay? They want to grow cotton in the South, specifically what's called the Deep South or the New South. As you look to the map here, here we have the coastal states, the Gulf Coast states, and you can see how there's a migration, there's a movement of African American slaves from what we'll call the Old South to the New South. Okay, and you can see the lines here. So, like I said before, slave owners and plantation owners needed more slaves to produce cotton. They couldn't go get them from Africa because that was illegal. So how do they get around that? Well, they buy and sell slaves. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit during the week, but this tears apart families. For the most part, a lot of the slaves being bought and sold were younger children. Slave owners wanted young people so they could survive the journey, and so they were less likely to rebel. So as we look into this stuff, we have to keep this in the back of our mind. Families being torn apart as part of the Industrial Revolution, as part of the Second Middle Passage. So as we look back to the big ideas from this section of the Industrial Revolution, we have the impact of the cotton gin. The cotton gin is going to allow more cotton production in the South, and it's also going to increase factory production in the North. So while the North was against slavery, they were benefiting from the products produced by the slaves, okay, from the cotton. The raw cotton was shipped to the North, and the North is creating the textiles, the clothing, the curtains, all of that kind of stuff. All right. Really important to understand immigration when talking about U.S. history. And we have all the way back to Jamestown to the Great Migration North. And then there's still immigration happening today. Families from African American families coming specifically from Africa today and immigrating into the United States. Finally, kind of tying this all in together, this idea of sectionalism. Remember from previous units, sectionalism is when people identify more with their area of their country than the entire country together. So we've had a few different lessons on that, but we have the North believing in the Northern values, we have the South believing in the Southern values, and then we have the West. And these three areas are battling money, economy, freedom, strength of the government. All of these different ideas are interwound within sectionalism, and eventually it's going to lead us to the Civil War. So some big ideas to talk about in the Industrial Revolution in this part of the unit. As always, if you have any questions, you can contact your teachers. And good luck with your learning.